Hamas wants to take over the West Bank and turn it into another Gaza. That's the main thing you need to understand about what's happening now in the West Bank. I'm Daniel Rubinstein. It's February 4th, 2025, and this is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokesperson's office. This morning, a Palestinian terrorist in Samaria, in the northern West Bank, opened fire on an IDF checkpoint. 2 IDF reservists were killed and 8 were wounded. The attack was well planned. The soldiers were ambushed. The Palestinian terrorist who carried out this attack would have loved to make his way down to the Jordan Valley and attack Israeli civilians on Road 90 along the Israel-Jordan border. The terrorist couldn't reach this road because a checkpoint was in the way. Hamas has been clear. Its war against Israel is not confined to Gaza. Hamas wants to turn the West Bank into Gaza. Hamas wants to turn the West Bank into a launching point for attacks against central Israel. Hamas is popular in the West Bank, where the population was hugely supportive of the October 7th massacre. Israeli soldiers are operating in the West Bank now, rather than waiting for Hamas to do to Tel Aviv what it did to Gaza border communities on October 7th. If Palestinian terrorists are not stopped where they are now in their own cities, then they will open fire on Israeli cars, as they have done many times. And if they are not stopped there on the roads, where they can ambush Israeli cars, they will threaten all of Israel's population centers and Ben Gurion Airport. While many are focused on Hamas never being able to carry out another invasion of Israel from Gaza, Hamas already has its eyes on a bigger prize. It wants to take over the West Bank and destroy any cooperation that exists today between Israelis and Palestinians. This is Hamas's goal, and the Iranian regime completely supports Hamas in this goal. Israel will counter the Iranian axis wherever it extends its reach, whether in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, or the West Bank. All eyes are on Washington today ahead of the meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump. Regarding the ceasefire in Gaza, Trump said on Monday, "I have no guarantees that the peace is going to hold." He's right. There is no guarantee. The idea of a permanent ceasefire, of peace with Hamas, is an insult to Hamas. Hamas's central organizing principle and the reason for its popularity is that it will use violence at a time and place of its choosing until Israel ceases to exist. Something must change if Gaza is going to have a better future. And that something is that Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza. Right now, we are in phase 1 of the hostage ransom deal. It's a delicate time. Hamas is releasing a few Israeli hostages every week in exchange for a huge ransom payment in the form of the release of huge numbers of convicted Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prisons. I am sure that what Trump and Netanyahu will discuss today is how phase 2 is supposed to look. Phase 2 calls for a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in exchange for the remaining hostages, who at this point will be all the male IDF soldiers that Hamas seized on October 7th. A full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, while Hamas remains in power in Gaza, is a return to the reality that existed on October 6th. It's going to take some creative and powerful diplomacy from the Trump administration to find an appropriate solution to this problem, and also the problem of phase 3, which calls for the reconstruction of Gaza. Gaza cannot be reconstructed if the government of Gaza is calling for more war. That would just be an opportunity for Hamas to rebuild its military infrastructure and plan the next war. Let's take some questions from anyone who's watching live now on our social media platforms, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, Facebook, and so on. Please submit your questions, and we'll take a couple if we can.
Thank you, Daniel. Our first question comes from YouTube. How is the world reacting to what's happening in the West Bank?
That's a big question. The world is a very big place. As far as what much of the world is demanding, in effect, is that Hamas be allowed to be in a position to carry out another October 7th massacre, to be the government of Gaza, to increase its popularity and its grip on Palestinian society, while the international community sends food, supplies, and construction materials to Hamas. It's very rare to find a world government, country around the world that is clearly calling for a different government in Gaza than Hamas. The United States is an exception that is clearly seeking an alternative government. What other governments are saying is they want a ceasefire, they want a sustainable ceasefire, they want the humanitarian situation in Gaza to improve, they want the Israeli hostages to come home, while others are calling for Hamas to receive a big ransom payment and to allow Hamas to remain in power. So when you ask about the world, that's a very big question. You've got to break it down, what the United States is saying, what European countries are saying, what Middle Eastern countries are saying, what Russia and China is saying. But in effect, what much of the world is calling for is that Hamas will remain in power in Gaza with no solution to any kind of new government in Gaza. From Israel's perspective, this is, of course, unacceptable. And that is why Prime Minister Netanyahu is meeting with President Trump today to discuss the future of Gaza in a serious way.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Esther on Instagram. After phase 2, could the war resume?
What we call the war could resume at any time. And the reason that the war could resume at any time is because Hamas remains the government of Gaza at this point, and it is the policy of this Hamas government of Gaza that Israel should be destroyed. So right now we are in a situation where Israel is paying a massive ransom payment to Hamas to receive some of the citizens back that Hamas took on October 7th. Now, after phase 2, the idea is that there won't be any more hostages in Gaza and Israel has withdrawn completely. The question, can Israel resume the war, is an easy yes, and Hamas knows this. So Hamas is also going to be seeking some guarantees. Why would Hamas want to give up all the hostages if it knows that Israel wants to perhaps resume the war and use force to change the government of Gaza? So both sides are currently at irreconcilable positions. Israel is saying Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza and yet has committed to withdrawing in full from Gaza in exchange for the hostages. And Hamas is saying it's not going to give up the hostages unless it gets some guarantee of its own power. It's going to take a change from the whole international community to put real pressure on Hamas. So we need more pressure on Hamas. We need more pressure on the countries that are backing Hamas. That would be Qatar, Turkey, Iran, South Africa. These are the countries that are providing the most moral and financial and political support to Hamas. If we want to see a change in the reality in Gaza, we need more pressure on Hamas and the countries that back it.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Ed on YouTube. What about Lebanon? Will Israel be able to leave soon, or is the Lebanese army still failing to do their job?
The situation in Lebanon is quite fragile, to say the least. A couple of months ago, Israel agreed to a ceasefire in Lebanon that was supposed to last 60 days. And at the end of that 60-day period, Israel was supposed to be withdrawn completely from Lebanon. And in place of the Israeli army, the Lebanese army was supposed to mobilize and fill the power vacuum that Israel would leave and not allow Hezbollah to be back in the area, not allow Hezbollah to rearm. Hezbollah remains in the area and it remains armed. That by itself is a violation of the ceasefire. The ceasefire deal calls for Hezbollah to be disarmed. If Hezbollah is armed, it's a violation of the deal. And after October 7th, Israel is not going to wait for other people to enforce such deals. We've been in this situation before. We had a Lebanon war in 2006. Hezbollah was supposed to disarm after that war. It didn't. The Lebanese army didn't do it. The Lebanese government didn't order it to do it. The UN did nothing, and international diplomacy did nothing. So we're in a similar situation where we need more pressure on the Lebanese government and the people of Lebanon to take back their country from Hezbollah and ultimately seek peace with Israel. Israel does not want to be in Lebanon. It doesn't want war with Lebanon. But as long as there is a militia in Lebanon which doesn't take orders from the Lebanese government and instead take orders from the Iranian regime while calling for the destruction of Israel, it doesn't sound like a situation that Israel can just withdraw from and wait until Hezbollah decides to fire more rockets and anti-tank missiles and suicide drones into Israel. So the Lebanon front is another situation that I'm sure the Trump administration is going to take a closer look at and ask the question, how do we ensure that there won't be another Lebanon war? And the answer has to be that Hezbollah disarms and gives up its war against Israel.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Anna on Instagram. How is the ratio of prisoners released for each hostage determined? And why does Israel have to release convicted murderers, many of whom are serving life sentences, instead of just ones with lesser sentences?
As far as why Israel has to do this, the simple answer is because that is what Hamas demanded, and Hamas kept to its demands. Israel would have been happy to receive its own citizens back in exchange for a one-to-one swap. However, Hamas did not agree to any such thing, and Hamas's position was the one that won because Hamas continued to hold the hostages and was not feeling the pressure to release these hostages. So in exchange for one Israeli female soldier, Israel has freed 50 Palestinian terrorists from its prisons. So that is a 50-to-1 ratio. For the civilians, I think it's something like 30-to-1. Hamas demanded a very high price. It did not accept anything less. Israel has agreed to pay this ransom in order to bring its citizens home who we know are alive. The big question we need to worry about is what next? How do we ensure that we will not be in this situation again? And step one is pushing the entire international community to understand that Gaza cannot be rebuilt, cannot be reconstructed, while Hamas is still in power in Gaza. The government that carried out the October 7th massacre cannot be the government again if the situation is going to be better. That is what it's going to take a little bit more diplomacy and time and effort to resolve. I don't know how it will be resolved. In the meantime, Israel is paying a very high price to bring its people home.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Jesse on YouTube. We know that Egypt also shares a border with Gaza. Why do they not want to take in any of the refugees?
Egypt, of course, has a long history with Israel and the Palestinians. In 1948, Egypt invaded the newborn state of Israel with the intention of destroying it and taking the land that it was able to. And since that time, there have been many wars with Egypt. It was Egypt's invasion that helped create the Palestinian refugee problem in the first place. I think Egypt should be taking a lot more responsibility than it is for the plight of Palestinians who are in Gaza living under the Hamas government. But Egypt also does not want its territory to be a base for future Hamas operations against Israel. You can imagine a situation where many tens of thousands, if not more, people in Gaza leave Gaza, they go to Egypt, they set up communities in Egypt. The same dynamic that led Hamas terrorists to use Gaza as a base for operations against Israel could lead to Hamas using these new areas in Egypt as a base of operations against Israel. Egypt doesn't want that, and Israel doesn't want that either, because that would bring us into a greater confrontation with Egypt. Jordan, it's the same situation. They don't really want Palestinians on their territory anymore because they have taken so many, and they have had a civil war with the Palestinians back in 1970. So there's a lot of nuance to the situation. I think that the neighboring countries should take much more responsibility for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but I would not expect them to enable Hamas to build a base in their countries. And I wouldn't want Jordan to turn into a Hamas-stan country where instead of Gaza having a base along a 25-mile border, Hamas would have a base along Israel's longest border. So we need to be careful with what we expect while also hoping for a change in our neighbors' calculations.
Thank you. This is our final question. Joseph on Instagram asks, what are you hoping will come out of Bibi and Trump's meeting, and what would you like to see the Trump administration do?
I would like to see, first, a clear statement that Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza. It has been said, it needs to be emphasized, Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza. This needs to be the starting point for international diplomacy, for dealing with all of the food and supplies that are entering Gaza. Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza if people are expecting that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is going to be any better. That's number one. I would like to see UNRWA shamed, lost of its funds, and dismantled. UNRWA has been adding fire to the conflict rather than improving the situation. It's long past time for UNRWA to be out of the picture and replaced by Palestinian responsibility. I would like to see the Trump administration emphasize that Palestinians must take responsibility for living in peace and responsibility for their own future with their neighbors. That currently has not happened. They've gotten a pass, and that needs to change. And to make clear that if Hamas remains the government of Gaza, that Israel is under no obligation to allow construction materials and cement to enter Gaza so that Hamas can use them to build its tunnels. There's a lot more that can be done. We have to zoom out. It's not just Gaza that we're talking about, but also the Iranian regime, which is building a military nuclear program. I would like to see the Trump administration take steps to pressure the Iranian regime to give up its military nuclear program, to improve the situation in Lebanon, and to expand the Abraham Accords. There's a lot that can happen if Gaza can be improved from its current situation. Let's wait and see what happens at the meeting today. We will talk about it again tomorrow here, live, 3 p.m. That's 8 a.m. on the East Coast. It's our live daily briefing. I hope you'll tune in. If you miss it, you can watch it later on YouTube. Thank you for joining. Thanks for asking your questions, and we'll meet again soon. Have a lovely day.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Dejobnik signing off.